Hi, hello, and welcome back. In this video, we're going to begin looking at Chapter 5. So in Chapter 5, we're talking about policing in a post-September 11th society. So the terrorist attacks upon our nation in September 11th, 2001, uh, changed our country, right? I know a lot of you are young. I was even young. I was actually in my first year of college when the attacks happened. I remember waking up and going to the cafeteria for breakfast, and all of a sudden, people started talking. People started hearing the news about what was happening, and then someone got a TV out. We didn't have a TV in the cafeteria, but then somebody got a TV out, and then we started watching, and we're just in complete shock as to what happened, right? And so I won't go over the whole details of that. I know a lot of you were super young and maybe not even born yet, so you might not remember it, but hopefully you talk about that in some of your other classes, because it radically affected our lives. It radically affected a lot of things about our society. And the same is true with criminal justice and law enforcement. So uh, after September 11th, experts kind of see there's a new type of policing emerged, right? And so this was really the focus, in a lot of ways, kind of turned to an international focus, right? It's not just our local community police that we need to be concerned about. Like, there are bigger things at stake, bigger things happening in the political world and the world stage that affect us. And so this whole intelligence-led policing kind of came forth from that. This statistical analysis and almost really more of a partnership also kind of emerged, as far as you have local police, you have federal police, you have the FBI, and then obviously Homeland Security came from that whole thing. So now you have this whole new Department of Homeland Security, and the emphasis really became, hey, we need to work together and not just be separate entities, but also work together. Local law enforcement can also help federal law enforcement in addressing some of these issues and in preparing and handling terrorist attacks and these large scale type of things. So yeah, the events of 9/11 totally impacted the whole organizational development of state and local law enforcement, like I said. And what it did, it really resulted in a renewed focus on community policing, which we'll talk a lot about today, problem solving policing, and on other data driven models. Okay. So we're not actually going to talk about September 11th anymore, but the experts in criminal justice kind of look big picture, and they see, okay, we've had these different eras of law enforcement, and strategies and methods that they evolve over time, right? So the way we used to do law enforcement 100 years ago is different than the way we do law enforcement now. Okay. And so um, the emphasis in law enforcement is really been community focused over the last 40 years. So around the 1980s, right around when I was born, experts see that as like a new era, this era of community policing that came into focus and became the emphasis of community policing. We'll talk about that. And then here, 20 years ago now, after September 11th, um, still community policing is the focus, but now also into this kind of intelligence led, data centric, kind of analysis focused policing is kind of where we're going here, future moving forward. Uh, there are kind of five approaches to contemporary policing, kind of modern policing, that your textbook highlights. So the first one is community policing, and we're going to talk a ton about community policing. Okay, that is really the framework of all law enforcement at the local level, especially right now. Right, is that connection to the community. The police are to serve and protect the community. The police are members of the community. There's this partnership there, right? So community policing is huge. The second one, which we're also going to talk a lot about, is problem solving policing. Okay, you're going to have a whole midterm assignment just focused on problem solving policing or problem oriented policing. It's called different things, but it's the same. And the idea is you're focusing on the problem and not on just punishing criminals, but on solving the problem. Like, hey, there's this problem of crime. How can we solve it? Not just to put a criminal in jail, but to prevent the crime from happening in the first place, to prevent the symptoms or the various circumstances that led to the criminal activity in the first place. How can we solve this? So it really, that's the focus, is solving the crime problem. And then we're going to talk a little bit about comp stat policing, kind of, that's just abbreviation like computer statistics, right? We have such incredible technology now, and access to technology and information. So how can we use that in our policing? How can police agencies use that to be more effective and more efficient in enforcing the law? Intelligence-led policing, similar. A lot of these overlap, and there's a lot of similarities, but intelligence-led is, hey, we need to share this information, right? If the FBI has information that can be beneficial to Anaheim Police Department, how do we share that information? Or if the Anaheim Police Department has information that would be helpful to the FBI or the CIA, how do we make that information shareable, but also still secure and safe? But how can we use that to help one another and to be more effective and efficient in policing? And then the last one, evidence-based policing, also is sometimes seen as like predictive policing or things like that. Okay, like based on the evidence and what we've seen and statistics, and how can we see, almost predict what the crime is going to be, or where crime is going to take place, and how can we proactively police so that doesn't happen, right? So it's kind of this, again, using information, using statistics to affect what we do, not just doing the same thing we've always done, not just being that patrol officer that just kind of goes his circuit, but based on the evidence, based on statistics, how can we police more effectively and more efficiently? So those are the 5 we're going to talk about here in your book, and you're of course going to read about them in your book. The importance of community. Okay, so in all 5 of these, community really is key. Okay, and that's kind of what I want to emphasize here, and what your book really does emphasize as well, is just the importance of community, right? The community has to be engaged and connected in what law enforcement is doing. And that, of course, is something we see as an issue right now, right? When you consider the events of the last year with the protests, the shootings, the riots, all that, you see that, wait, maybe the community and law enforcement are rather than partnering together in a common goal, maybe they're kind of at odds, right? And that's not a good thing. That is not going to be successful for anybody. And so the community engagement and the community participation and everybody being on the same side is extremely important to policing and effective policing. So your textbook talks about social capital, right? And that is what is the level of engagement of the community? Okay, is the community really engaged in the law enforcement process? Like, right? Does the community support officers? Does the community support what law enforcement's trying to do? Or is there a divide and actually opposition or a lack of support, right? Because that's greatly going to affect the how effective the police can be, right? So talk about that, talk about asset mapping. That's kind of an idea of just, I mean, it's really kind of, you look at the whole city or you look at the county and, okay, how many police do you have in an area, and how can they be effective, right? If there's only one cop for, thousands and thousands of residents, that's not going to be effective at meeting the needs of the community, right? So you're looking at those things. And also kind of new with that too is, okay, how many of these issues that are being dealt with by police should be dealt with by police, right? Or do we need other like social workers or mental health professionals or other kinds of service providers to be stepping up and dealing with some of these issues that police are dealing with, so the police can focus more on the law enforcement and the criminal side of things and less on the community service side of things, right? So there's those issues as well. I want you to think about your community, right? How engaged are you in your community? Do you know your neighbors? This is an interesting question, right? And this kind of comes down to what they call the bowling alone, or but some professionals, some experts, academics call the bowling alone phenomenon, and that's the idea that even though we have technology and all these ways to connecting with social media and all these things, in reality, we're actually less connected as a community to our neighbors and to the people that live around us. And so if you think of yourself, like how many of your neighbors do you know well, right? Do you know your neighbors well enough to go next door, knock on the door and say, hey, can I borrow, something, or can you help me out with this? Like, do you know your neighbors that well? Do you know the people that live across the street from you? Do you know the people that live a couple doors down? Um, Even the people at your school, like how connected are you with the people in your school? How connected are your parents with your teachers, right? Is there a connection there and a working together? Or is there just a total disconnect, right? Are any parents going to like parent teacher meetings or school board meetings or things like that? Are the parents involved in what's going on in the community? If there's like town hall meetings, are how much of the community is going to these town hall meetings and are involved in what's going on in the community? Even things like voting, right? We just had an election. What's the level of voter engagement? How many people are voting in the election, and not just the presidential election, but in the local ones, right? We have local elections, and are the people voting even aware of, okay, well, who's running for mayor, who's running for city council, who's running for the school board, and how engaged are we in the community? And the idea of the bowling alone phenomenon is we're actually less engaged as a community. And I would agree, as a parent, as a, as a law enforcement officer, I could see that there's definitely a lack of engagement. And I try to be engaged, and it's still difficult, right? I try to be friendly to my neighbors and get to know them and be connected with what's going on, and it's difficult, right? Some neighbors just don't want to. They drive into their garage, shut the garage door, and you never even see them. So you never even have the opportunity to say hello or connect or have any type of relationship. But all that to say is, if we're going to be engaged as a community, the community kind of needs to come together. There needs to be a unity of community and law enforcement to connect. And so that's just community as a whole. But then when you talk specifically about the community and law enforcement, okay, what's the engagement there? What have your interactions been? If we were in a live class and you could respond, I'd ask you, what have your interactions been with law enforcement? Have you talked to a cop? Have you had any interaction at all? Have you gotten a ticket? Have you not gotten a ticket? Have you been in the car when maybe your parents got a ticket? Or have you had to call the police for something else? I mean, hopefully, obviously, I hope none of you were victims of crimes where you needed the police involved because you were victimized. I hope that wasn't the case. I also hope none of you were suspects either. I hope none of you are criminals and got arrested for things. That would be not good either. But what involvement have you had with police? The reality is most of you probably haven't had any involvement with police. So your perception of the police is really just based on what you see in the news, or maybe what your parents have said or your friends or neighbors have said about the police, but you personally haven't had any interaction. And that, when talking about this community policing idea, that would be not good, right? If community policing is going to be effective, we need the police to be in the community, interacting with the community. We need the police to be interacting at our schools, connecting with students, connecting with the neighborhood that they're serving, so that there's this mutual respect and there's this partnership, right? The police need to be meeting with the members of the community, find out what's important to you. What are you looking for? How can we serve and protect you better? What do you see? Because obviously, people that live in a community, they're going to kind of know potentially, what's really happening in the community better than even the police officer that's just, doing patrol there, right? Hey, are you aware of any crime or problems or issues that need to be addressed? And there should be a partnership and a working together, right? So serving and protecting diverse populations. That's a big issue. Obviously, Southern California is amazing. I love living here. This is probably one of the best places on earth because of the diversity we have. We have so much diversity, even just in Anaheim, where most of you guys are students. The diversity in Anaheim is fantastic, right? We have so many people from different countries, different ethnicities, different backgrounds, all living together, and we have this really cool diverse issue. But the police need to be equally diverse and know how to serve and protect those diverse communities, right? And that's an important part of community policing, is that the police represent the community that they're serving. You can't just have a bunch of old white guys serving as police when the demographics of the community that doesn't represent, right? We need minority officers, we need younger officers, we need female officers, right? And so that has been an emphasis of policing over the last couple decades is making sure the police force is more representative of the actual community. Involving and educating citizens, that has to do with what I've been talking about, is getting the community engaged, right? And a lot of it is educating, right? Police, law enforcement, they need to educate the citizens as to what they're doing and why they're doing it. There needs to be a level of transparency there, right? So the community needs to see, okay, well, this is what the law enforcement is doing. This is why they're doing it. This is who they're arresting. These are these are how many calls for service they have, right? The police are largely overworked, right? The number of people that call the police for help is almost too much for many city departments to handle, right? They get too many calls for help than they can even manage. And so you might call the police for help, and it might be several hours before the police get there. That's because the police are dealing with so many other things first, right? They have so many higher priority things that they're dealing with. And so educating citizens on that, hey, this is all the stuff that's going on. This is what the police are dealing with. So it's not that the police are neglecting or not doing their job. It's they just have too much to do, and this is what they're involved with. And then partnerships, again, like I mentioned earlier, partnerships is huge. The community and law enforcement need to partner together. For an effective community policing program to work, there has to be this partnership and this connection where the law enforcement community are working together for the common goal, right? There are, of course, some resistance to that community policing, and there's some pitfalls in that, okay? And your book talks a little bit about these. I'm not going to go through all of these, but you can look into these, right? Some organizational impediments, union impediments, community impediments, transition impediments, things like that. These are all just things that could prevent effective community policing. What are some things that would affect currently the police and the community in Orange County from working together and partnering together, right? There's kind of a distrust right now, right? And I would say that, in our nation as a whole, there's a distrust. In Orange County, maybe not so much, but there's definitely that distrust where there's an us versus them mentality in some spheres, and that is going to impede and prevent the effective community policing. So we need to, law enforcement needs to overcome that. The community needs to overcome that, where they can come together and really focus on a partnership and working together. So we'll end that video here, and we'll catch up some more on the next one.